Hi everybody, this is a video for notes on talking about the shape of histograms. The first thing on your note sheet is this problem. This was our warm-up problem, so you can go back to the slideshow and click on completed notes to check your work for the warm-up. But we're gonna just move on to the notes part. So the first thing I want you to do is take a look at this, and you want to pause the video. Think about what you notice about these histograms and what you wonder. So I'm going to take my pen and kind of draw over these histograms. When we talk about the general shape of histograms, we're talking about this. Like, what is the shape? Is there like two modes? Is it like generally flat? Is it skewed at all to one side, or is it kind of centered? And you can use this information to better describe your data and talk about what your histogram actually means. So to describe our histogram shape, we often use S.O.C.S. That represents shape, outliers, center, and spread. So let's start with shape. Shape of your histogram is like looking at what does the overall shape of your graph look like. Does it have two peaks? Is it single peaked? Does it have no peaks? That's kind of the first question that you would be asking yourself. So, single peaked? Bimodal means that it has two peaks, or uniform means that it has no peaks. It's just basically flat across. Something that is single peaked, and we'll get to like an example of this in a moment. After you figure out it's single peaked, you have to decide if it is normal, if it's skewed positively, or if it's skewed negatively. And I'll teach you a trick I just learned as well on how to be able to tell if it's skewed positive or negative. So after you figure out the shape of your histogram, you're going to check if there's any outliers. Are there any outliers? And remember that an outlier is a data point that is far from the rest. So it stands out because it is not where the most of the data is. It's like really far to the right, really far to the left, or if you have two modes, it might be somewhere in the middle. Okay, measures of center. So next, after your outliers, is center. What are the measures of center? So normally for this, we think about the mean, median, and mode. But remember with histograms, we don't have exact numbers. So we can estimate the median because we won't get an exact number for our median, but we can estimate about where the median is. We can't get an exact mode, but we can get a modal group. And your modal group is basically what is your tallest bar, because that's where most of the data is happening. So notice, like, modal group is your tallest bar. That's why we call it bimodal when it has two peaks, because it has two highest bars at like different spots in the data. And then the last thing is, if your data is normal, which means it looks like a bell curve, you will actually be able to estimate the mean, because your data is pretty symmetrical. But that's something you'll get more into when you get into 11th grade. And then the last thing to really think about on your graphs is the spread of your data. So that is asking, what is the maximum, the minimum, and the range of your data? And normally to describe that, you might say something like, the data ranges from to So from whatever your minimum is to whatever your maximum is. So make sure you have these notes written down. You can pause the video here if you want to write these down. Okay. The next thing that's important is, if we're looking at shape, remember we said that there's different types of ways that your graph might look. These are the different types of ways that your graph might look. So the first thing that you would be doing when you look at this is deciding, is it single peaked, which means it has one highest point? Is it double peaked, which means it has two highest points? Or is it, or is it uniform, which means it has no peaks? So single peaked means one high point, one modal group. Double peaked, double or bi means two, so that means two high points. And no peaks or uniform. Uniform means like all the same, so it's kind of like flat. So for uniform, we could say frequencies, meaning our height, are all the same. Whoops, did not mean to draw that line. So bimodal means it has two high points. Uniform means that the frequencies are all the same. It's basically pretty flat. If it's either of these two, that's all you need to say to describe the shape. If your graph is single peaked, we need to distinguish if it's normal, positively skewed, or negatively skewed. For a normal graph, it's very symmetric. This would be like where the center of our data is. And this is often called a bell curve because it looks like a curve shaped like a bell. Basically, it's the same on both sides. Like if you folded over that center line, it would be the exact same. So it's very symmetrical. We call this a normal distribution. So if your data is skewed, it means that your data has what we call a tail. And where that tail is compared to where the center of your data is tells you if it's positively skewed. So if it's more closer to like higher numbers, or if it's negatively skewed. Something that I just watched on YouTube that helped me remember this is if you were like a skier that's on top of the hill and you're trying to figure out which way you want to go for a nice leisurely ski, for a positively skewed shape, you're going to go in the positive direction. You're going to go towards bigger numbers. For a negatively skewed graph, you would probably go towards the smaller numbers, the negative direction. So hopefully that helps somewhat when you're figuring this out. So I want to try one example with you guys. That's all basically for like the main notes. So you could pause your video at this point and get out a notebook if you want to. But basically, I want to talk about this graph here. And we're going to describe it using shape, outliers, center, and spread. So let's look at the shape first. If I were to draw the shape of this graph, I feel like it would be something like this. And if you notice, there are two peaks. There are two modal groups. There's this one, and then there's this one. So we can call this graph bimodal. Now let's think about what this graph is representing. This is the Kentucky Derby winning times, so horse races, from 1875 to 2008. So it goes from like 168 seconds to 119 seconds. Oh, I guess the other way, 119 seconds to 168 seconds, and the number of races. So the longer the time, the longer it took the horse to win that race. So it's kind of interesting to think about, why do you think horses are so much faster on this side versus up here? What do you think like the difference is? What do you think is going on? What years do you think it was faster in? It kind of brings up a lot of interesting questions to think about. The next question is, are there any outliers? I would say maybe this one way out here is an outlier. So I could say there is one outlier at, that's about 7. I would say like 171 seconds. So one of the winning times was 171 seconds, which doesn't really seem to fit in with the rest of the data. For center, what is the measures of center? So for my median, if I had more time in this video, I could actually go through and cross off smallest, biggest, smallest, biggest. I could actually find the exact number for the median just by crossing off the smallest and the biggest numbers. We have two modal groups. It looks like our first modal group is at 120, so that's 26, 25, 24, 23, 22. So it looks like one modal group, which means the highest bar for that part of the data is at 122 seconds. If we look at the top up here, I would say that this is another modal group because it's where our second peak happens. 61, 60, 59, 58. And then our data does not have, it's not a normal distribution, so we can't estimate the mean at this time. So the last thing is the spread. In our case, the data ranges from, our minimum, it looks like, is 119 seconds to, we said that was 171 seconds. So that's the spread of our data. So these questions are useful to ask yourself because it really just makes you think a little bit more about the data, what it's representing. We have two modal groups, which is interesting, 122, 158. I wonder what time period the horses were faster in. Maybe there are ways to keep horses like healthier, make them stronger, or something that we know more of now in like the 21st century. So I hope this video was helpful to you guys. Make sure to go back and complete the worksheet. Thanks. Bye.